Hey everybody, this is Tracy with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point, and we are here to recap the Quad Season 1, Episode 4, which was titled Things Fall Apart. The Quad is good, y'all. And you know it is so good that it has ruffled the feathers of some HBCUs who, I think was the president of Hampton University, had the nerve to write Miss Deborah Lee a 3-page letter, letting her know that the show has offended them. But I'm here to tell you, as the parent of a graduate of a HBCU, now some of the drama may be, overemphasized, but damn, it's a TV show. But the things about the conditions of the campus and all that stuff, I am here to tell you that is true. So I don't know what they're all upset about, but the HBCUs do need to step it up if they want to compete with some of these other non-HBCU colleges, and that's all I'm going to say about that. So let's get into the recap. So the show opens up and we have a guy walking into a room, and he has a computer, and he sits down and logs in, and he's like looking at some surveillance footage, and it looks like he's trying to manipulate the footage, I guess, to make it look a certain way. And so he has like this big cup of soda or something that he keeps slurping on. And in the background, it has this real eerie music that I've been trying to figure out what the song is, but it says something about be careful who you love and know who you are, but it was just a real eerie soundtrack. And so throughout the entire episode, we keep going back to this room with this person, and we can't see their face, we only see their hands on the keyboard, and it looks like they are working in maybe Adobe Premiere, and they're moving scenes around in the video. So the main premise of the episode was a fundraiser party being hosted by Eva at the president's house, at the president's mansion or house. And so there was faculty there, members of the football team, members of the marching band, who were filling in and playing, the music. They had assembled like a jazz band, and they had a girl there singing. And then there were students there and potential donors. So Eva is working in overdrive, working the room, selling the university until Mr. Jason shows up. So it was like she stopped mid-sentence talking to these people to go and see if Jason had lost his mind. So flashback scene, we have Eva on the phone with Crystal, who's her admin assistant at the college, and Jason walks up, and even though Eva is dressed and ready for work, Jason just has a towel wrapped around him. And so while she's talking, he's kissing all on her neck and on her head, and she can't concentrate on the phone call. So she gets Crystal off the phone, to deal with Mr. Jason. And so, he pushes her back on the bed, but she sits up like, boy, stop playing. And so while they're talking, he kind of makes jokes about, coming to the party, but Eva shuts it down. He says he understands that he can't be there. So he obviously did not understand, because he arrives at the party with a friend and colleague of Eva's, and I think it was a professor at the school, and her name is Simone. And so she introduces Jason as her new teacher's assistant. And so Jason acts like, he doesn't know Eva, and refers to her, and he says, nice to meet you, ma'am. And, any woman of a certain age does not want to be referred to as ma'am. And so I'm like, boy, Eva is going to get you. So then the Simone tells Eva that Jason is a PhD major, and he's majoring in psychology. And so she says that, oh, I know he needs to go and meet Dr. So-and-so. And so Eva pulls Jason away under the guise of going to meet this other professor, or maybe it was a donor who was there, that works in the field of study that Jason is studying. And so Simone is like, oh, well, Jason comes from the college that Eva used to work at. And so Eva's like, oh, really? And so then I think that's when she went over to introduce him to the other guy. But we never see him get introduced to the other guy. Instead, Eva pulls him into a hallway and is like, what the hell are you doing here? So outside we have Cedric, and he's arriving for the party, and there's two security guys, that's checking the guest list to let people in. So the one guy's pretending like he doesn't see Cedric's name on the list, and the other guy thinks that he can't read, and so he bends over and he points out his name, so they let Cedric go in. So as Cedric is walking past, the first guy is like, dude, I can read, I saw his name, but he didn't want to let Cedric in because he knew Cedric was the guy that had been arrested and let go for killing his girlfriend. And so he's telling the other guy that, had that been them, they would have been arrested, tried, and sent away for life. But because Cedric is a college student, he was able to get off. And so he seems to have like an issue with the kids that are in college. So that sort of plays into the whole, classism type thing. We learned that Cedric is at the party because Eva had came and asked him to perform because whoever was supposed to fill the spot had backed out at the last minute. And so she has this video of him doing his personal statement in the form of spoken word to get into college, and she tells him that she wants him to, do the same piece at the party. So they get into a conversation, and she basically tells Cedric that, he's got to get over his pity party and move on. But Cedric is like, I didn't want to come to this school. My girlfriend has been murdered. I wasn't able to mourn her death. Like, please don't come in here telling me, that life goes on and, Simone's in a better place, because I really don't want to hear it. But Eva was basically saying, you are still here, so you got to keep living and you got to keep moving forward, and I need you at this party. So Cedric doesn't really agree to be there. He said that he would think about it, but he shows up at the party, and then he's just like Debbie Downer the whole night, moping around, like not engaging with anybody, sitting, off by himself. So he was a drag at the party. As Eva is reprimanding Jason for showing up at the party after she told him not to come, Sydney walks up to tell her mom that the caterer is looking for her, and she's like, the caterer is really flaky and you need to go talk to her. And so she asks Eva, well, are you going to introduce me to this guy? And it's obvious that Sydney is taken in by Jason and his good looks and his mild mannerisms, but Eva is not having it. And so she introduces Sydney, and she basically tells Sydney, like, you're drooling over him, knock it off. And Jason says that he doesn't mind. And so then Eva picks up something. She's picking up a vibe, and she quickly lets Jason know that Sydney is her daughter. And Jason actually seemed surprised, which shocked me, because I'm thinking if they had an affair at her old job and where he was a student at, wouldn't he already know that she has a daughter? Or maybe he just never met the daughter before, but just seems like when she said Sydney, that a bell should have went off that this was her daughter. So Eva leaves them in the hallway to go check on the caterer and see what's going on. So when she returns, Jason and Sydney, they've taken a seat on this little bench that was in the hallway, and Eva is just not happy. And so Sydney had a bottle of champagne in her hand, so she takes the champagne and just like starts drinking it. Like, what else can go wrong tonight? So Sydney and Jason, they seem to be really comfortable. And when Eva tells Sydney that Jason needs to get back to Simone, Sydney asks for his phone, so he hands her the phone. And then she enters her number into the phone and gives it back to him. And so I was just like, okay, Sydney is just a little too damn slick for me. Like, call me boo. But Eva is about to have a heart attack. And I really can't figure Jason out, because it's like 1 minute he's acting like he's all love struck and he can't live without Eva. Then the next minute, he's showing how really immature he is, because I'm thinking he's probably like 25 years old. And then he gets all serious and takes charge, and, like checking Eva, telling her, watch your tone, and I need you in this bedroom in 5 minutes. And then she just all over the place. And this little boy with this young dick just driving her ass crazy is all I can surmise. So the band director, he's playing a selection at the party. And afterwards, he gets up and he's talking about, the band and how, for them to start back playing and what a great job that they're doing. And then all of a sudden, like in the last episode, he has some type of pain, and he kind of can't catch his breath, but he pulls himself together. And what is surprising to me is that, it's very obvious that he's in some kind of distress, but nobody ever seems to pick up on the fact that something is going on with him. So then we have a flashback scene of him and he's in bed with a female, but I can't tell if she's a student or if she's an older woman because she was kind of older looking. And then I was trying to think in the last episode when Mr. Briggs was trying to get those two students entered into the business program. This chick kind of looked like one of those chicks that he was introducing to Eva. But anyway, they're in the bed and he experiences, one of these little pain episodes. And so the woman seems really, concerned about him. And so she's talking to him and asking him, what's going on. And he tells her that he had gone to see a second doctor, to get a second opinion, and it came back the same, that he has lung cancer. And it must be like in the later stages. And so she says, I just really wish you would open up to me. And she's acting like, she's really concerned. So I'm thinking like this is his wife or something. But then after he opens up and says that he had tried to contact his sister and, let her know what was going on, she all of a sudden just like cut him off and says, okay, well, I got to get going. And she jumps up out the bed and starts putting, her dress back on. And so it's obvious that they're in a hotel room. So then he sits up in the bed and he looks kind of sad, that she's leaving. And he reaches into the nightstand drawer and pulls out payments and hands it to her. And I was like, okay, is this a prostitute? But then I was thinking maybe she's not like a prostitute. Maybe she's one of those, I can't think of what they call them, but it's something like it's like a cuddling service. And it's for people who can't really perform sexually. So they hire these women and the women come in and they kind of, show affection to them and hug them and, hold them and everything and let them, express whatever they need to express. And so she came over and got that money and gave him a hug and kiss and said same time next week. So okay, Dr. Diamond, you cut it all down on Noni and being hard on them kids in the band, and let us find out that you're just an old lonely man that's about to die alone. Back at the party, everyone is still mingling, and Bryce, he gets into a conversation with one of the potential donors about being on the debate team. And so he was telling the guy about he had done a debate and he was debating against this girl. So then the guy, he kind of cuts in and was like, oh yeah, I remember those days, and you have to show them, what and all this stuff. So as he's going on and on, Bryce has a flashback to where I think it was like a week ago, and he was in debate class and he was actually debating Sydney, and they were talking about police brutality and how as a black man, when you go out into the community, you got to be, worried about the police stopping you and what can happen if you get stopped. And so basically Sydney schooled him in the debate, and so he was kind of feeling, like he had been emasculated by this woman, while this guy is in his ear saying that, men are smarter than women, and that, he's sure that he beat this female. So, Bryce is scared that they may find out the truth that Sydney spanked his little butt in that debate. Meanwhile, as Bryce is, dealing with this inner turmoil, Cedric finally decides to get up and start wandering around the room. But you can tell that he's feeling really out of place because he's just looking at everybody, acting all paranoid, not really talking to anyone. So then he stumbles upon Noni, and she has some kind of device in her hand that controls I guess it was like an amplifier or something for the band members. And so he realizes that Noni is feeling as much as an outsider as he is. And so he tries to help her, tune the equipment that she's holding. And they have like small talk, and he asks her, if she's talked to Ebony, and she said no, she hadn't gotten around to it. And so he told her he was thinking about taking a road trip to Miami to see how she was doing, and he invited Noni to come along. So at that moment, Danny, the drum major, walks up and he starts yelling at Noni and, really putting her down. And so Cedric, he isn't feeling it, and he stands up to Danny, but then Noni and Danny walk away, but he can still hear Danny yelling at her and calling her stupid and everything. So Noni, she's tired of being talked to any kind of way, and so she devises a plan to get back at Danny. and by putting him up against the star quarterback of the team, Terrence. And so she tells Terrence that Danny was putting the team down and saying that they were lucky to have won these games, because I think the football team is on a 4-game winning streak, but Danny is like downplaying it, saying that it's just luck, not talent. And so she then turns around later in the show and tells Danny that Terrence was questioning his sexuality and saying that any man that'll put an instrument in his mouth will put something else in his mouth. So now, Terrence, I think, kind of brushed off what she was saying, but of course, when you question a man's masculinity, of course, he's going to be all in his feelings. And so Danny wasn't happy to be hearing that, but it did kind of put him in, put Noni in his good graces, because then she told him that she had adjusted this device, and that was why his sound came out better. And so then he was like, okay, well, freshman, you all right. I can give you a pass. And all the while I'm thinking, like, Noni is so messy. Like in the first episode, I was all team Noni. They were doing her wrong, wouldn't let her be in the band. So then when Ebony decided to go home after the hazing experience, and they offered Noni the spot on the band, in exchange for her not talking to the DA about what really happened, I kind of was like losing faith in her. But then I realized she came to the school to play in the band, so I gave her a pass on that. But then after tonight's episode, I'm like, okay, Noni can't be trusted. Then we have Eva. She hits a roadblock when she presents Madison to one of the donors. It's a lady who works in community, what do they call it? But she works for a bank, but they have like a division where they go out and they get involved with the community and make donations to different charities and things. And if you guys remember, Madison is the white girl who Sydney is roommates with. And so the donor is not impressed that Madison has a 4.3 GPA and is a merit scholar. And she tells Eva that in her capacity at the bank, that she cannot suggest awarding money, that could go to white students, that she wants to assure that the money that they donate is actually going to black students who are desperately in need. Because if it had not been for somebody giving her a scholarship, that she never would have been able to go to college, because that's how poor she was, and it didn't matter what her GPA was. So then Eva said, well, we just got to work together and find, students like you to ensure that they get the money. But then the lady was like, no, sister, you need to find those students, and when you find those students, you come see me. But then Eva, she was kind of, razzled by it, but, she wasn't going to let it show. And so she told the lady, I'll call and make an appointment and we'll get together next week. So the morning of the party, Carlton Petaway, he's the one that wants Eva's job. So he was about to sign a contract to go work at another college. But then as he was getting ready to sign his contract, he had second thoughts, and he told the people that, he realized that he really loves GAMU. That was his alma mater, and that's where his heart is. And so he apologized, for taking them through the whole interview process and everything, but he had to go back to GAMU because that's where he was most needed. So at the party, he's talking to a guy, who asked him what happened to his plan to get rid of Eva. And so he lets him know that things backfired when the football team started winning, and then the band director kind of backed up, like he was no longer interested in dealing with Eva. So he said that, he had to figure something else out. So Eva gets up to introduce Cedric with a really nice introduction speech, building him up to the audience. And so he gets to the mic and he starts, trying to get the rap piece or spoken word piece that he was there to do. But then he starts looking around the room, and like Bryce's dad is there. We know how he treated him when he was in prison. And then he's just looking at all these people with all this money and how he feels like they're looking down on him. And he's looking at the students, when he was getting arrested, nobody was there to support him or, come see him in prison or anything. And so he just flipped the script and he started, he slammed everybody in the room. from the band director to the football team to Eva to Bryce's dad. It was like no holds bar. And, you know, some of the students were looking like, all right, brother, tell it like it is. But the rest of them were looking mortified, like, what the hell just happened? And I'm thinking, poor Eva, like, you know, from Jason showing up to the party, now Cedric then showed his ass. Like, what else could go wrong? But, you know, we were about to find out. So as Cedric left the party, Danny decided to go and confront Terrence for some reason. And so those two get into a fight, and they have to be escorted out by security. And I think the fight really jumped off when Danny insinuated that Terrence was going to lose his position to Casper the Friendly Ghost, talking about Bojan. And so I think Terrence pushed Danny out of the way, or pushed him across the room. And then Danny came up and tried to swing at Terrence. And then that just wasn't a move, because then he just like picked him up like he was on the football field and slammed him across a table or something. I was just like, y'all in college, like, come on, be for real. Now you're at the president's house, and you know she done invited you to this party, and this is how y'all gonna treat her. And of course, you know, people have their cameras out, they're videotaping, saying how they're gonna put it on World Star. And Eva is just like standing there in a state of shock, could not move. And you know, the band director ended up leaving, and then it goes to the Pettigrew guy, and he's smirking as he's drinking his champagne, like, oh yeah, I'm getting closer and closer to getting that seat in the president's office. So after things were trying to calm down, you know, as they took the fight outside, everyone starts getting a notification on their phones. And so Sydney and Madison, you know, they had walked out when the guys were being escorted out. And they're talking on the front porch. And of course, Madison's boyfriend was supposed to come to the party, but he never showed up. And so they are going, you know, back and forth. And, you know, Sydney is really getting tired of Madison. And then she finally tells Madison that, you know, did you ever think that maybe he's okay, that nothing happened to him, that he just stood you up, that he's just a liar? And then I got to thinking, have we ever seen Madison's boyfriend? Like, is he black or white? And because I know he plays for the University of Georgia, but I can't remember if she ever said what race he was. And so Madison gets the notification on her phone, and she shows it to Sydney. And then all of a sudden, Sydney starts freaking out, like she is in a state of shock, and she drops the phone on the ground. And Madison's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? Like, what's going on? And Sydney can barely talk, but she finally gets it out that it's her in the video. And so Madison picks up the phone, and she starts looking at the video. And the video is of a girl and a guy, and they're in some bushes, look like on the college campus. And he's forcing himself, well, they're having sex. And then it has a hashtag that says rough sex or rape. And so now you can't tell if they're just having sex, or if she's trying to fight the guy off, or what's going on. As Madison is trying to comfort Sydney, the scene goes back to the guy that's in the room with the computer, and then the camera kind of scans up his arm, and then we get, you know, to his neck, and we realize that he's actually with the campus police department. You know how they have that little bar on their collars. And so I'm like, oh, wow. So I don't know if Mr. Pettigrew is behind this, if he paid the guy, you know, to find footage, you know, to follow Sydney around, or what's going on. So who do you guys think is the guy in the video? At first, I thought it might have been Terrence because of the haircut. But Sydney didn't seem to be bothered that Terrence was at the party. So maybe it's someone we don't know. And then I started thinking, and this is why I asked the question about Madison's boyfriend. Like, could it have been her boyfriend that raped Sydney, and that's why he doesn't want to come to the party? And also, why wasn't Mr. Briggs invited to the fundraiser? So you guys, leave your comments below. Rate the video. Subscribe to the channel. Please share the video with other people. And I will get with you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.